Hello, boys and girls. K-Lob here. Welcome to another installment of EVE Online. And today, I figured it'd be nice to kind of talk more about some more of the inner workings of the game. Some things that I haven't really mentioned yet, because I've just been running the career missions. But just some basic things about ships and whatnot that might be a little bit confusing to those that haven't really played the game that much, and when you just kind of look at it, your eyes just kind of glaze over and you're just like, what am I looking at? But really, as humans, we're intelligent human beings, and we're able to establish things into categories, groups, and hierarchies, and that kind of helps us understand information a bit better. So, just kind of going through some of the equipment here. I guess first, I guess it would be beneficial to kind of talk about the four main races or factions in the game. And if you're an alpha character, you're very much limited to that faction. I started out as Galente, so I can fly. I mean, as an alpha player, and you start out as Galente, you're very much limited to Galente ships. And you can tell by this little Omega icon in the little pipeline. That just says beyond that, you have to be an Omega player, which I am. So, that doesn't affect me. But if you're an alpha player playing Galente, you can see how far you can go. You can go up to cruisers. Anything past that, you can't get. So you can get cruisers, you can get the Navy cruisers, which is one step up, and you can get the Navy frigates, which are one step up in the destroyers. Being Galente, they have a bit more of a industrial setup as opposed to the other ones, where they actually have 5, with most of them having specific specialties. And if you plan on doing any sort of, I guess, just moving things around, mostly for like planetary stuff here, like this guy, then Galente may be the faction you want to start with. But it's easily doable with the other ones. Because if you look at Caldari, for example, they have 2, and they're both good. You can easily move things around, but those ships are not geared towards specific things. I think Mimitar does have one that is here, and it's just moving a bunch of ammunition around. But it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal, I would say, for alpha players. If you plan on doing that, just understand that, hey, maybe it takes 2 trips to do something, to move your stuff around. But that's fine. It's really, I mean, it's a sandbox game. You can play however you want to play. But just kind of going with, just starting out with the ships. Each race obviously has their own advantages and some things that are unique to them. Just starting off with the Galente, their main damage source, I would say, is probably drones primary, and then secondary are hybrid turrets. And you can see some of these specialized, like for example, this is more of a hybrid turret ship. The Catalyst for destroyers, and the Algos is more of a drone boat. So Galente has those 2 things, and they each have a specific E-War thing, and kind of how they take damage. And Galente is more of an armored tank. They're not the best armored tank, but that's what their main tank source is. Caldari, their missiles primary here, and then hybrid turrets secondary. More of a shield tank, and their E-War is just ECM. E-War, I wouldn't worry about it right now. I would just kind of focus on this stuff here when it comes down to figuring out what race you want to play as an alpha player, because alpha's free. So, missiles, I love missiles. Some people hate them. I think they're fantastic. And I think as a new player, they're probably the easiest ones to learn. There's not a whole lot of skill research required to fire them. You don't need excellent tracking for them because guess what? Missiles don't really track. They're the damage type that you just fire and forget. They always hit their target if it's possible, and you really don't have to worry about it too much. It's more of maximizing the explosion velocity and the radius compared to the ship, which at an alpha level, I don't think that's that big of a deal. So if you want to focus on other things, Caldari might be the way to go because very few skills required, and seeing as alpha kind of has a reduced skill training rate, that might be a good way to start. And you can kind of focus your skills allocations on other things. Amar, they're the laser people. Lasers primary, drones secondary. They are the armor tanking race in the game. Some of their ships actually have bonuses to it, like this one here, the Punisher. You can see the 4% bonus to all armor resistance. And the opposite is the Caldari. They're the shield tanking main ones. And each of the races kind of have like a secondary. Like Galente is a secondary armor tanking, and Mimitar is the secondary shield tanking, and they can also armor tank as well because they're kind of the in between. So lasers, they're good as well. I think their downside is they use a lot of capacitor to fire, and it's very limited on what damage types they do. But I wouldn't worry about that as an alpha player. As you play later on, yeah, you might want to change it up a little bit, but I think it should be fine. I mean, if you're doing it for PvP, yeah, I would. That might be something to think about, but it's fine. It's a sandbox game. You can do whatever you want. And if someone tells you you're doing something wrong, you just tell them to go to hell. Because it's your game, and you can do what you want. Your setup may not be the most optimized, but hey, that's okay. And then Mimitar, their main is projectiles, which use no capacitor to fire. Their damage types vary, and their ammunition uses no capacitor. So think of projectiles like guns we have today. And their big thing is I think they're the fastest ships out of any class, with the Almara being the slowest. Yeah, like I said, they can both be armor tanked and shield tanked kind of based on the individual ships. If you play StarCraft, a good analogy for these races is Mimitar is very much Zerg-like. They're fast, and if you just kind of look at their ships here, they're very low tech looking, and I think they say that they're kind of built based off on the scraps that they have around them, so kind of makes sense. Fast, very agile. They're pretty good at a different form of tanking, which is speed tanking, where you just fly so fast that nothing really hits you. I would say Amar is very much akin to the Protoss, as they're one, they fire lasers, and two, if you just kind of look at their ships, the ships look very Protoss-like. They're just curved and almost majestic looking. I would say, I really like the way their ships look. Some of them, other ones kind of look like this one here. This looks like, honestly, a giant flying shrimp, and I'd rather not fly a ship that looks like a shrimp. But hey, to each their own. If they want to fly a flying ship, a shrimp, go for it. If you want to name it shrimp and then fly it around, go for it. It's up to you. You can make it look like a murder shrimp like this. All black, dead shrimp. Iron Man shrimp. To each their own. But they do have that, and they have awesome names like the Apocalypse. Look at that. And it just looks like it would murder your face with lasers. And I think it does. And you can make it even look even more apocalyptic. Like that. And of course, all these other ones are just the pirate factions. And I don't think you can fly yeah, you can't fly those as an alpha player. You can fly the basic Venture from Ore, but the other ones you can't. But anyways, that being said, each one kind of has their own kind of main weapon type. So when it actually comes down to fitting a ship, and you go to the modifications, here are the equipment. Here, turrets. So this is a Galente. Let's just go ahead and look at hybrid turrets. You can see that there are two main types, and it's the same for all of them. You have one that's a short-ranged one, short-ranged, higher damage, and then a longer range, lower damage. So for hybrid turrets, the short-ranged, high-damage ones are blasters. Railguns are more longer range. I think beam for energy turrets are shorter. Pulse are longer, I think. But you can look at it. You can look in the stats and see what it is. If you look at this, let's look at blasters. You can see the sizes, and those correspond to the size of the ship. So this will be the ones that you want to look at, because these are for frigates and destroyers, and these would be for cruisers. So here, you kind of look at it and you're just like, oh my god, look at all of these things to look at. I don't know what is what, where is up, where is down. And really, if you kind of look at it a bit longer, you can see that there are three basic types in here. And you see there's an electron blaster, ion blaster, and neutron blaster. And really, there's just different flavors of each, right? And kind of a good way to know which one's better is you can just right click, look, and then look at the meta level. That will kind of tell you where they are on the tier system. So it starts with 0, and those are just the basic of basic, which are these three here. Kind of look at them, see, they don't even have a meta level on them. And one of these, I think is this it? No, it's also meta level 1. The Tech 2s are obviously better, but I don't think, yeah, see, if it has this little orange box over them, that means they're Omega only. So as an alpha player, you don't need to worry about that. But, yeah, let's see, I think this one, meta level 2, yeah. So that one's probably a little bit better. And obviously the higher in the meta, the more expensive they are. So if you just look at the Tech 2 blaster, see meta level 5. And those here go for, yeah, see, about $500,000. Yeah, so if you ever want to kind of see what the differences are, you can click on this, and there should be a compare tool here. And you can just pop them on in. Hope if I did it right. Let's move you over here. So we'll pop in this one. So that was, it's electron particle beam. So it's the electron blaster, and then the limited. There. And here we'll just kind of select how you want to compare it by. So we'll just do accuracy, CPU usage, and damage modifier. And meta level. There we are. So this is the lower meta level. You can see just as far as damage modifier goes. And this one does a bit more damage. CPU usage is the same. Accuracy fall off is the same. Off on range. this one has a little bit better optimal range. So, oh, power grid usage. Where'd it go? Here. So they both the system requirements are about the same. So that's kind of the basics on that, and kind of really how you can compare and see. And if you're not really there for the best damage ever, then you can kind of, you know, make some sacrifices and be like, you know what, this here, it may not be as strong, but you know, it's like half the price, and money's kind of valuable when you're starting out. So maybe it'd be better if you just do this if you're just going to destroy some PvE ships or rats. So it's a good little intro to that. When you actually go to fitting a ship here, you'll see that for each of these things, let's look at this salvager here, they have requirements. So you have a CPU requirement and a power usage. You can kind of see it here in this nice little bar, how much you're using when you have all this stuff equipped, and this is kind of the remaining CPU, remaining power grid for your ship. And that's important when it comes down to managing your fits. And you may plan out this really awesome ship, this will look good, and then when you come down to buying things and putting it on there, you realize you can't. There's not enough CPU or not enough power for you on the power grid to fit everything. So keep that in mind when you're building a ship. I think there's even I think they added this recently, here, simulation. You can actually look at some things and put it on there. I think you can. I may be entirely wrong. But you can also look online and see what other people fit for the ship, and kind of get an idea from there. Other thing is capacitor. So this is like the energy required to use some of these fits. So for the guns, they use various amounts of capacitor. I think energy is the highest, hybrid turrets is the mid, and missiles the lowest, with projectiles requiring none. And you can see mine is not cap stable. If I have everything on, I will run out of capacitor in 40 seconds. So I tend to not have everything on, but you can easily also build a cap stable build where you can have everything on and everything will be fine. Additionally, there are things you can train up to increase both this and work with this, as well as there are modules you can have on here to increase their respective ones. So other thing to consider, another thing is how many turret slots there are available. Here's the turrets, here are the missile launchers, your mid fittings, your low fittings here, and then riggings. And these here, it's a whole other skill to learn up. It just makes your ship that much better. But with these, they stay on your ship. You can just pop these other ones off, but the riggings stay on until the ship is destroyed. So these are a bit more committed, and I would probably worry about those a bit later. But that's kind of a basics into this. I know it can be very confusing in the beginning, but after a while, once you kind of break things down, they make a bit more sense, and it just makes the game just that much more awesome. As you can see here with propulsion, you have afterburners, which makes your ship go faster, and micro warp drives. Those are the main two you need to worry about in the beginning. These are later on. Micro warp drives make it go much faster, but drastically increase your ship radius. I think that's what it's called. And the ship radius is what helps you get hit or miss hits. As in, the bigger your ship radius is, the easier it is for other things to hit you. So obviously, when you do this, you fly faster, but you're a bigger target. However, Minmatar, let's take a look here. actually have bonuses to reduction in that. And I think the Tall War is one of them. Yeah, see, 15% reduction to micro warp drive signature radius. Signature radius, that's what it's called. Penalty per level. So this is a good ship if you want to fly fast with the micro warp drive and not really get hit and just launch just a crap ton of missiles at people and try and blow them up really quick. And I will say this about projectile turrets, and a little bit to extent to missiles. They're very much, they have what's called a high alpha. You'll hear that term a lot in this game. And essentially what that boils down to is everything here is kind of referred to in terms of damage per second. And which kind of tells you a lot, but really doesn't tell you much about how much damage you do in a single volley. Things like lasers and high turrets, they fire for decent damage, but they fire rapidly, so they have a higher or a much lower higher fire rate. So they may fire a volley every 3 seconds. All right, so it gives you a pretty steady DPS. Things like missiles and projectiles, they do a lot of damage or a high alpha per volley, but they may take 10 seconds to fire again, which that also has its advantages and disadvantages. Really you might fire and you may almost kill the ship, but for PvP it may give them time to run away. But on the other hand, you may fire and do so much damage in one volley that you just one-shot them and you don't have to worry about anything. So there's that. And that's mostly for projectile turrets. Missiles, they have the disadvantage of actually taking some time to get to them. So if you're flying, say, I did this in another account, the Corax here, I had it, and the missile range was 40 kilometers. And you'd fire it, but it would take like 15 seconds for it to get over there to hit the ship. So that's in a way a disadvantage, but I mean, in the end, it's your ship, you can play however you like. I think in the next video I'll kind of go focus a bit more on kind of more of the defensive fittings that you can put on a ship. I covered a little bit about the basics of turrets and what you can put on them. I should mention you can put upgrades here, and they each kind of correspond to their respective system. If you just kind of look here, ballistic control here, so it's guiding missiles in flight. So I think it increases their. We can just look here real quick. Yeah, so this one increases the rate of fire bonus and the damage bonus by this amount, and you can fit a bunch of fittings on there the same type, but there's a stacking penalty. So these are also nice to have on. They do have some usage requirement, but you can put those on and it just makes you do better damage. So those are other things you can look at to do. Drones are their own thing. I mean, you just buy them over here. I am way wrong. There's a place to buy them. Where is it? Here, drones. It's its own category. I'm an idiot. And you can just buy them. For where we are, it's just the light drones here. And there's one for each race, and they each do a different damage type here. So really there's 4 damage types: explosive, kinetic, thermal, and EM, electromagnetic damage. And each race kind of, as far as drones, each race has their own little damage type. And the turrets themselves to an extent, have their own damage type as well. Case in point, energy, for example, is entirely EM and thermal, if I remember correct. Oh, let's look at their charges. Yeah, here. Yeah, they're entirely EM and thermal. The different frequency crystals for lasers really decide the range modification and the capacitor need. Like for example, this gamma S is basically minus a third of the range and minus 50% of the capacitor use. I will say that the good thing about these crystals is you can easily swap them in combat. As for other ones, it takes some time to reload, and there's, at least for the Tech 1 crystals, there's no ammunition. You just have one and you're good. Hybrid turrets are, their ammunition is here, and I think it's kinetic and thermal. Well, let's actually look at a standard one. Here we are. Yeah, kinetic and thermal. And for their ammunition, it's kind of the same. There's a whole bunch, and it covers the whole spectrum of range, damage, and capacitor use. Missiles, they have the wonderful ability of being one for each damage type. And projectile ammunition here kind of covers both ends, where it covers a whole damage spectrum and range spectrum, and each one of these does a different kind of type of damage. It kind of covers. So for example, this carbonized lead does kinetic and explosive. You go down to depleted uranium, it does thermal and kinetic. You go to, let's say, nuclear, it does this. And I think there's a couple that do more than two. See, this one does those two. I knew there was one that did three. Those. So what's nice about this is you can kind of mix it around on what you want. Ah, here, this one does three different types. See? So there's something to think about. When we'll get to ships, the pirate factions kind of have their own resistances that are kind of standard for that faction. So you can kind of tailor what you want to use for those ships to make you do a bit more damage. As you can see here, every ship kind of has their own kind of set of resistances, and yeah, so the hull has a third resistance to everything. The armor itself, it's more akin to EM resistance, kind of secondary to thermal and kinetic, and then lastly to explosive. So, and then the shield is mostly kinetic and explosive resistance. So once you get through the shields, you can easily, if you just have high explosive damage, you can just shred the ship's armor like nothing. So that will kind of do it for a basic introduction to damage types. The damage for each ship, it may be like a lot, but really you can kind of say that each class has their own type of way of dealing damage, and there's some advantage to each. Just pick one you like. If you want to shoot lasers, go for it. If you want to shoot missiles, go for it. If you like drones and have a drone boat, go for it. Just whatever those kind of suits your fancy. If you're an alpha player, you're kind of limited to that. But hey, the good thing about this game is you can play alpha to enough that you can buy Plex, and that Plex gives you 30 days of Omega clone. So, and as long as you keep that up, you can essentially play this game at the fullest for free, which is a nice kind of strategy to do. And that's actually, we're just gonna look up Plex for a second and see how much it is. There. So looks like it's running about 1.2 billion. So if you can find a way to make that much, look at that. You can play for Omega for 30 days. And so I think that might be an ultimate goal as an alpha player. See how quickly you can get up to 1.2 billion. And there are many ways to do that. I mean, you can do it from killing ships, killing rats, running missions, mining, planetary, and hopefully through this YouTube video series, might be able to cover most of those. So, as I said, my goal in this game is 100 billion-isk. I may bump that up depending on how simple or difficult it is. We'll see. But like I said, next video we'll kind of cover more of the defensive things and kind of go from there. And it's just, like I said, provide a nice little tutorial, and I might include some links to other videos to kind of further explain it. If you think my interpretation is just complete crap, I will provide some links and you can watch those videos and kind of get a more formal understanding of it. And as always, testing it out is the best method of learning. So just put some fits on and fly it around and find what you like. This is K-Bomb, and I will be signing out.